And hello, everybody. Welcome to Narrative on a Wednesday night, our election special. If you could hear the heavy breathing before I started, it's because nothing is really working as it should tonight. But it's going to be a great show. Stick around, I promise. Sherry Jacobus is back. It's so nice to have you here. The former GOP strategist is here. Sherry, how are you doing? Welcome back to Narrative. Oh, I can't hear you. Maybe you're on mute.
Thanks. It's good to be here. I haven't done this for a while. I haven't done this for a while on camera. I was distracted for the past, 10 months or so with a little bit of cancer. So we're
just a little bit of cancer.
Hopefully done with that.
You're looking great, and we're so good to hear the good news about your recovery, and may continue. So thanks for being here tonight. And Rachel Bitterkoffer is here as well, the strategist who we've had on before, just recently, talking about democratic messaging, and she has a lot to talk about today, I bet, after last night's results. How are you, Rachel?
Hey, I'm better now that I've relocated to Oregon and don't live in Virginia.
Right? You didn't do that last night. You did that before last night, presumably. But many people might be thinking, how do I get out of Virginia?
That'd be a quick move.
Got a lot of friends, though, and colleagues,
Yeah.
so it is painful.
Certainly a lot of hand-wringing to be done over last night. And we'll be doing a lot of that tonight. There's something going wrong in the democratic world, and we'll figure out exactly what that is with the help of YouTube, but also anyone on chat. Please give us your comments, your thoughts, your questions on Twitter and on YouTube. We'll be monitoring those throughout. We should mention right at the top here that it does appear that Phil Murphy has won the New Jersey governor race, becoming, I think, only the first or maybe the first to do so in many years, a re-election of a governor in that very tight and swingy state. Or it used to be swingy. It's not really that swingy anymore. Now it's very much a blue state, I think. So that's the reason he maybe did it. I can't see exactly the final results here. And I'm not sure if it's officially been called or just been called by the Wall Street Journal, which is what I'm looking at here. But it does appear like he will hold on to his office, which is good news for Democrats in what was otherwise not a very good day in politics at all. Of course, the big news came out of Virginia, where we saw Republican Glenn Youngkin sweep to victory. This was a really remarkable thing. No one expected it, and there it was. It can only be called a sweep because he was basically an unknown just a few months ago, and now here he is. What's your read, Sherry, on what happened in Virginia with Youngkin's victory last night?
His victory,
Yeah.
yeah. A couple of other minor things, and then I'll give what I think was the main thing pushing it. He had a lot of money. He was able to put tens of millions of dollars of his own money into this race. And usually in a year like this, after the other party sweeps the presidential campaign and House and Senate, this is normal for Virginia. That said, Terry McAuliffe was running almost as if you could have been an incumbent going for re-election. He had been governor before. As you know, in Virginia, you can only serve 4 years at a time, one term at a time. So he was a known quantity. I don't think the Democrats really put the effort into Virginia, to be honest with you. But ultimately,
The effort in terms of money, or the effort in terms of machine?
They just didn't appear to be working that hard.
Mm.
They just didn't appear to be working that hard. I think that McAuliffe came out into this kind of late, actually, and there wasn't like this consistent full-on effort except at the very end, and it needed more than that because, as we know, the Trump Republicans have been out there pounding this crap for quite some time. Democrats lost the messaging war. They let the whole critical race theory thing be painted as, oh, the government's trying to control education, and that worked very well on more the lesser educated white women in Virginia. They bought that. If you look at the polling, the exit polling on that, the high school educated, very different from college educated white women in Virginia. But also close elections are won or lost in the margins. And I think that Democrats were not enthused, or other people who were voting blue, who voted blue in 2020 because they wanted Trump gone. They wanted Trump and his thugs to be held to account. They wanted justice. And we haven't seen that. And it's becoming very rapidly, very demoralizing, even for the most sophisticated of voters and activists. And there's nothing happening they aren't getting the legislation passed. They aren't protecting elections. And we suppose, we give them the House and the Senate. Yes, we know about Manchin. We know about Senate, but we know all this. But it is what it is. And so there's this huge, and we saw this going in. And if you look at the polling going into this, there was a very significant enthusiasm gap in Virginia between Republicans and Democrats.
But both sides showed up in good numbers, didn't they? I mean, there was not a real turnout disappointment. I think everyone felt good about the numbers coming out.
Clearly not enough. If you look at what happened with an insurrection, and you look at, I mean, this should have been a bit of a blowout. And there are some people who were on the margins, who could have been convinced to go for somebody they knew, like a Terry McAuliffe, who would have been a safe choice. And they weren't quite sure about this stuff, but they were easily scared, easily fooled, and it worked.
Rachel, this idea of critical race theory, I mean, no one really understands what it is. And I think that's half the point, is everyone sort of made it their own, and they've understood it to mean different things. And to me, there was one clip on NBC, I think, where one mom was saying, we don't want our kids being criticized for what happened in the past over race. That's how she took it. That's her understanding of what critical race theory is. So I get everyone on TV saying, hey, they don't even do CRT in schools there. Yes, I know they don't do CRT in schools. That's not what they're talking about. It means something to these voters that they don't want to be blamed, or they don't want to live in the past, or they don't want to be accountable for the past, and they don't want their kids to be accountable in the past. So CRT is a very real thing, and it feels like it's not going away.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, it's a lab created issue that's designed to dog whistle for white resentment and, the challenge that white people feel as their population and hegemonic power is really being challenged, especially white men. So this is something that the GOP, I mean, literally, I always joke and say they come up with stuff in the lab, and I know that Sherry could tell you this, but literally they came up with CRT in a lab, and it is by intentional design, meant to fill in the, as you just said, ambiguity of whatever white tension is there. And they're going to weaponize this all across the country in 22. And the question is, I told Democrats, do not engage on CRT. It doesn't matter that you're right on the merits. It doesn't matter that CRT isn't taught anywhere. It doesn't matter what CRT is or isn't. As long as you're talking about the issue, you've already let them win. They lodged it into the political space so that you would be talking about this and not about Trump's attempt to, literally multiple pointed attempt to steal power after 2020, the Republican Party voting, lockstep to cover that investigation up. They don't want us talking about their mismanagement of the pandemic, which killed at least 500,000 extra Americans. That's why they are doing those things. And I just want to add to what Sherry said in terms of the diagnostics from last night, that she's 100% right in her analytics there as like what happened and why and how. But one thing that I would add to it is that all of the things that came to play were 100% predictable, right? We knew, and I started talking to donors, with my organization, telling them, look, Virginia was a safe blue state because of enthusiasm. And once you have enthusiasm invert, we're going to see a really different competitive picture, especially down ballot, where they lost control of the state house that no one's yet talking about, but will eventually people will circle around to it.
It was a sweep for the GOP and everything.
Yeah, well, and Republicans also know very well in a state like Virginia that these parents were very easily flipped to, or very easily could pivot to really believe this propaganda, because these are people who, a lot of them, frankly, didn't have a problem with their children jumping rope and, playing Frisbee next to statues of Confederate soldiers who were, leading a war to fight to be able to continue enslaving human beings and owning them like chattel. So
and that's because
it wasn't that big of a leap.
Right. They themselves were taught this lost cause narrative in their own K through 12 experience, right? And then they learned differently, and their children are learning differently. So the reason CRT is a lose proposition for Democrats is because there is this fear amongst white people, especially non-educated whites who haven't been to college, don't have a lot of diversity exposure, that their status is threatened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is easy to exploit. They are going to exploit it. And our only play is to not allow them to turn 22 into a national referendum on race. We cannot win that battle, even if we're right on the merits.
Now that train has left the station.
With us.
That train is happening already. Next year, they have defined it as race. You know, Steve Bannon said it as clearly as anything, that he's sending out these women as his angels all across the country, and he'll be making sure that they continue to do this fight at school boards everywhere. You know, this is going to be personal, and it's going to be up front and close to everybody, and it's going to be hyper localized for everybody. So it's not something we can avoid. I mean, to Sherry's point as well, you shared these stats earlier on. You know, white women college grads, 62% McAuliffe, 38 to Youngkin. Almost the flip side of that, 75 to Youngkin and 25 to McAuliffe for white women non-college educated. So you're going to see this class divide really happen, or this education divide, which often looks like a class divide, happen across the country. I'm sorry, I should show you the graphics. There you go. Thanks for the dogs barking to agree with us. Whose dog is that, by the way? Is it yours, Rachel? Is that Sherry's dog?
Not mine.
Oh, not mine.
I don't have a dog.
Well, then, okay. There are dogs out there. It must be Rachel's dogs. We met him last time, I think. I can't hear you, by the way. I don't know if your microphone's off. Oh, you can't hear me? I can't hear you.
I muted for the dog.
Oh, okay. That's cute. We like the dogs. But my point is this. My point is that there's what was my point? My point is that it's going to be race, and it's going to be class, and it's going to be local, and it's going to be coming to your school board in the near future. You can't run away with it.
But here's the thing is, like, when Bannon's designing that strategy, he understands that about us, that we won't be able to resist, like the battle back, the news coverage, the talk about it, the shows devoted to it, the footage that we'll show. They're banking on that. They're just like they're banking on the youngins if they don't give them gun control or voting rights or Puerto Rico or whatever, will demoralize them. So, like, when we know that they're strategically planning that, it's like the law stuff that we talked about last time, with when they're delaying the clock so that they can take control and then reverse law, right? We know what they're doing. So we needs take a step back strategically and say, okay, if part of their strategy is our own behavior, we need to behave in a less predictable way strategically.
So can we talk about democracy and authoritarianism, and then they're talking about race? Will that be a weird election?
But we can't help that, though, because of the white supremacism that permeates everything. So in some ways we do have to get ahead of it and define this as white supremacism and show how abhorrent it is. And you do that by showing the insurrectionists, by showing, that the Confederate flag that they were carrying through the Capitol, and they've been ordered by pretty much by DOJ to give these light sentences to these people who did this on January 6th. So I don't know if we're going to be seeing indictments. I think if we don't, you've lost a lot of people. I think the midterms are really lost because a lot of people voted blue and held their nose on some of the policy issues because they put this as one issue voters. Getting rid of Trump and cleaning things up and accountability. And that goes through January 6th, which is steeped in white supremacism. So are Democrats smart by getting ahead of it, by saying they want to come into school and teach this to your kids and scare your kids and blame your kids and that sort of thing? Yeah, that's what they've done. So we can't really avoid it. We can't just say, we don't know how to message this or deal with this, so we're just not going to. I think that would be a mistake. Now, Rachel may be right. It might be a best strategy, but I don't think Democrats have thought that through. And I don't think they've fully been able to digest what happened yesterday. But I don't think that we should have a knee-jerk reaction and say, we simply can't talk about race.
So I'm having trouble with both of you talking at the same time because I'm having some feedback on your, Rachel, I'm having on your volume. You're a little loud, so in your speaker. So I'm hearing Sherry back at us. No worries. Take it away, Rachel.
I have to respond to that. Of course. This is really important. This is a really critical point. Okay?
Go for it.
I am not saying you don't talk about the race issue or tap into animus. Okay. What I'm telling you, though, is you don't talk about it on the terms they want you to talk about. And Sherry, you're right? You come at it indirectly. You come at it but ultimately, what's the point of talking about insurrection and white supremacy? Where did the margins in Virginia matter? It matters on scaring the shit out of white suburban people and getting voters of color, uncomfortable enough to show back up at the polls, because it's quite clear that marginal part of the coalition has either vote choice converted themselves out and are being attracted to the GOP over this fear of their kids being indoctrinated with race stuff. And it's clear that we lost young voters of color. Latino voters were hemorrhaging because we're not even messaging them properly, right? So what you have to do is talk about it in a way that makes these voters, these white suburbanites, fearful for themselves, because they don't care about other people. They care about them. That CRT ad that got the Democrats baited into talking about Toni Morrison to close out Virginia. Why was it effective? Because it was a mother wringing her hands, white lady, suburbanite. Oh, my children were exposed to porn written by a black author in high school, right? It was about her and her kid, making people afraid for themselves. And that's really, it's not about ignoring the issue. It's about engaging it in a way that benefits you.
But if the choice that we're presenting then next year will be, democracy, or make people scared of authoritarianism, we say we don't want fascism to come back at us, or it's going to be between fascism or your survival of your white race. People are going to choose white race anyhow if they care only about themselves. So it's not really. Yes. That's a tough one to win. I'll tell you something that Kevin McCarthy is very happy today. He said if they continue to push these policies, it could be one of those biggest election losses for Democrats next year. He's predicting, it's just his prediction, 70 seats will be lost by the Democrats based on what he's seeing in the results. Now, who knows if that's true? It's probably wishful thinking.
But it's like 40.
Yeah, but it's a lot. It's not going to be. It's going to be hard to win a majority in the House. And so that's scary for everybody. And he's got a point. The Republicans have been given a pass. They are not actually being held responsible for the last 5 years of mayhem. Sherry?
No, they're not. And that's the problem. And that's why, you have all these folks that voted blue, like me, lifelong Republican, former spokesperson for the Republican National Committee, ran Republican races, worked for Republican leadership, or during Contract America, I was in Newt Gingrich's office, 4 days a week for meetings. And what Trump has done and what my former colleagues and friends have done to this country is appalling to me, as it is to a whole lot of other people. So we became, we put the country first and voted Democrats in, and they're not doing what we sent them there to do. So you've got an enthusiasm gap right there. There's no question about it. So I think the only way to fix this is with indictments. I don't know what Garland is doing. I was thinking, okay, is he holding off until after the Virginia elections because he didn't want to get, the Bannon fans angrier, and show out, or, show up, or just not have an impact. So it wouldn't be, he didn't want to have a political impact by the actions of the DOJ. But it's becoming very uncomfortable. Yeah, it's becoming very uncomfortable with everything he appears to be sitting on, frankly. And many of us are very, very nervous and very vocal about that. There were 10 counts of obstruction of justice in the Mueller report that was, handed. I mean, that's sitting there tied up in a bow. There's a lot, we've got, Michael Cohen, who went to prison for a crime that Trump was named co-conspirator. I realized Cohen, pled guilty. He wasn't, deemed guilty by a jury, and that might be part of the problem. So, we're all kind of hoping that Merrick Garland does the right thing. If he doesn't, I don't have any answer for it. It's just so confusing for some of the legal eagles. You've got Lawrence Tribe, you've got Glenn Kirshner, you've got people just really confused about how nothing is happening. You've also got, when you've got a guy like Steve Bannon out there, who is ginning up his troops, and he's the one that's able to push a lot of this propaganda and be this leader of the white nationalism and tearing everything down. He should be behind bars. He was pardoned by Trump, and we don't hear a lot of people talking about that. There's these people that should be referred to as criminals. Every time Roger Stone appears at some Republican event, they should be pounding on it. He's a criminal. I mean, would you have O.J. Simpson coming to these events and speaking on issues? And I feel like our side have almost become as desensitized to this as the Republicans have, and that's very dangerous.
Now that's one way of looking at it. The other way is to say that the message last night was don't go after the Republicans. I mean, I agree with you that maybe some stern action against the Republicans will reignite that sort of fervor that we had. But the other way of looking at it is that white voters don't care. White suburban voters know what happened and they just don't care, and they want to move on, and they don't want to look back. And maybe that's the message from last night.
They are hearing, but they're not hearing proper pushback though. You don't coddle. Look, we got Trump by coddling white nationalists. If you keep coddling white nationalists, you get more Trump.
Right.
So we have to be a little more sophisticated about it, and that's why people like Rachel are so good at this.
So Rachel, what do we do about this lapse or this missing messaging that's out there?
Yeah, I just want to say too, to me, and this has nothing to do with your illness, Sherry. Like, this is about your heart and your soul. To me, every one of you never Trump people are American heroes, right? I mean, this is a moment that is, as a political scientist that's an expert in psych and behavior, there is nothing harder than what Sherry Jacobus and other Republicans have done. And that's why I agree with her 100%. What they have had to do is like so astronomically more difficult than what Merrick Garland is being asked to do, which is enforce the rule of law. Because if we do not have the rule of law in America, then we have nothing. Right. And the only justification that you can come up with for inaction is this fear that it will look political. Well, I am here to tell anyone that hears this, like, what is playing politics is deciding not to uphold the rule of law in a country where the law is becoming flimsy because you think the other side's going to accuse you of politics when you could do nothing and they would do that. Right. I mean, so you have to take action, decisive action. She's right. If they don't by 22, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. It doesn't matter if my budget finally catches fire and I'm able to actually build the shield I wanted to come and put in Virginia and couldn't. It's all going to be for naught, because people have to. It's not like Virginia. And yes, it's true. The Washington Post editorial board penned a very good, and this was a big moment for them, begging people, look, Youngkin will not affirm Joe Biden's the legitimate president, will not affirm that he would have sent troops to DC on January 6th. You cannot vote for this man. He's a danger to national security. And it was ignored, at least to some extent, by the DC elite suburban vote, right? So, but it's not that was not made the point in Virginia. The McAuliffe campaign, I tweeted about this earlier, dabbled, almost like they were trying to do algebra without knowing multiplication in terms of trying to nationalize this governor's race. They certainly did not articulate a nationalized strategy in the vein that Sherry knows the Republican Party is capable of, where you make it about a national referendum on the brand, you poop on the brand, and you make it about a personal reason why somebody should care if Glenn Youngkin is like Trump. If there's no reason, like if it's just about this guy being like Trump, why should I care? You have to make it because if you don't care, they're going to destroy Northern Virginia. They're going to, next time there's a coup, they're not going to certify an election. You have to make stakes to voters and make them see why this matters. And honestly, there's nothing more bread and butter than the survival of democracy. You have to paint that picture for the electorate. Right. If the GOP can make voters care about CRT, you don't think we can make them care about democracy? Give us money, we can do it.
So why didn't they manage to do that with Trump? I mean, the Trump does sort of mean that to Democrats. I don't mean it to every Republican, but have they forgotten so quickly? It was only 10 months ago. Why can't they remember what Trump was like? Is it really just Democratic messaging?
You got to meet voters where they are. They're not us, dude. I mean, we are 1%ers.
Yeah.
We are. Anybody watching this show, you should not assume anything about other people in terms of political behavior, civic knowledge, anything like that, based on yourself, because you're a freak. You're there. Everybody else is not like you. They don't know who Nancy Pelosi is. Go walk through a grocery store and start yelling, hey, who knows Chuck Schumer? And someone's going to be like, hey, isn't that the pitcher for the Yankees? And you're going to be like, no, dude. Okay, because like they don't know any of this. So if the reason that that Democratic emergency is not the most salient issue out there right now is because we didn't make it the most salient issue. If you can make Benghazi salient, if you can make CRT salient, we can do it.
But there is this sort of, running on
Democrats assume that everybody already gets it.
Yeah,
I was going to say Democrats. They assume, they say, I can't believe that anybody voted this way yesterday. They assume that if you say something once or twice, everybody gets it, and they don't. It has to be repetition. You have to keep pounding at it, and we keep in Democrats. I'm not a Democrat, but they keep jumping around to different things, and that's Trump and Trumplicans controlling the agenda, because he crimes differently every day. That's what he did. He always controls the media narrative because, he's sexier in that regard, not sexy. Like, ooh, I mean, I gotta find a whole different
find
word.
a different adjective. Yes. But we know what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah, he's more interesting. He knows how to grab the cameras, and he had been cultivating those friendships of the media executives for years. He could pick up the phone and make Roger Ailes and Jeff Zucker do his bidding. And this is when, in the primary, I'd never heard of such a thing. It was terrifying and frightening and disturbing that he was able to do this. So he knows how to control the media agenda by just jumping around, and the media follows him. He says something new, does something outrageous, even though he's not on Twitter anymore. They all follow. Now you've got Bannon doing it. And so you have to I wish the Democrats would do some heavy duty polling to see which of the Trump crimes and crimes of Trump's most best known allies and family members are the easiest to understand and would be the most offensive to voters should you pound away at them, not just on the left. Because you don't preach to the choir, and we're putting too much money into preaching to the choir. But how do you find those persuadable voters? Because close elections are won or lost in those margins. You've got to go surgically into those margins. And sometimes that doesn't mean hitting hard. It might be a different way of talking to them about how corrupt Trump is on certain things. But if there are indictments, and if the indictments start raining down, that means that our side would be controlling that narrative, because there'd be so much happening, which is what Trump has been doing for 6 freaking years. So much happening, rain it down. And this is how you rain it down. And we need some justice, and we need it quickly. And we need Bannon arrested like now.
Hallelujah.
That would be a good start. That changes the narrative on Bannon immediately.
It certainly takes us away from the narrative of this $3.5 trillion plan, or whatever it is, the build back better plan that is not getting through Congress at all. I mean, that seems to be clouding a lot of yesterday's results. Do you think it had an impact at all, Rachel, or do you think people are sort of dialing that out?
No, I don't think it mattered at all. Like I said, I mean, the election results in Virginia, I think my prediction a year out was that they would win the governor's race narrowly and lose control of the House of Delegates. So obviously, they did worse than my prediction, but there's absolutely nothing that happened yesterday that I didn't see coming 100%. The districts that they lost I had a measly budget, I wanted to go build a wall around certain districts that my model indicates are going to be problematic for them, because college education is lower there than in Northern Virginia. And that's where I wanted to spend money and shore up. All I could do was basically field testing in 2 of them. Those 2, as all of the set that I was most focused on, all 5 of those flipped to the Republican Party. So, I mean, I was telling somebody on the phone today, it's the predictability. Like, we know exactly what's going to happen, almost all of what's going to happen in 22 right now, today. And like, that's bad, but we also know that we don't have to just accept that fate. Like, between Sherry and me and other innovators, we know what we have to do to at least have a chance to thwart the fate. And all we need to do is stop wasting money on the shit we know doesn't work and start directing it to innovation and change, and strategic change.
I want to get deeper into that answer in a bit, because I think there's a lot of information you can share with us on that. But first, we have to take a break. So we'll be right back as well with your comments and what you can do heading into 22.
Hi, friends. Thank you for supporting Narrative. Today's show is brought to you by Policy Genius. Now, there is no better time to apply for life insurance than right now. And it's not just the temperatures falling. Life insurance rates can go up with each year you delay buying. With Policy Genius, you can compare quotes from over a dozen top insurers all in one place. You can save 50% or more on life insurance or $1,300 a year or more on life insurance by using Policy Genius to compare those policies. Policy Genius licensed experts work for you, not insurance companies. So you can trust them to guide you through every step of the insurance buying process. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot and Google attest to Policy Genius's excellent service. You can get covered in as little as a week thanks to their award-winning policies that don't require you to do a medical exam. Instead, they do a phone call. This exclusive policy was recently rated #1 by Forbes, higher than options from Ladder, Ethos, and Bestow. Just head to policygenius.com and in minutes, work out how much life insurance coverage you need and compare personalized quotes to find your best price. Policy Genius will handle the paperwork and the scheduling all for free. They never sell your information to other companies or add on extra fees. You can head to policygenius.com to get started right now. Policy Genius. When it comes to insurance, it's nice to get it right.
And our thanks to Policy Genius for sponsoring the show tonight. So, ladies, I want to hear about where you think America really stands. I'm going to show you a spectrum of American electors, and of course they are everywhere. But where do you think the crucial voters are? If you looked at this from 1 to 10, you got people on the extreme left, you got all the way to the extreme right. Where do the bulk of Americans live right now on the scale between 1 and 10? Rachel, you go first.
Between 1 and 10?
Yeah, well, that's the way 1 is extreme left and 10 is extreme right.
I mean, honestly, it depends on if you're measuring symbolic ideology, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like, I'm conservative, moderate, liberal, symbolic, limited government, economic conservatism, or operational, because us political scientists, right?
Right.
Operational, so policy ideology. And if it's policy, it's definitely more like 3. And if it's operational, it's more like, center left. And if it's more like symbolic, like limited government stuff, it's center right.
But let's talk about what people are really voting on, which is policy, right? Is that what you're saying? So do you think that they're more center right, is what you're saying?
No. Policy wise, the country is squarely center left. But here's the problem, Zeb, I'll tell you. Mm-hmm. And I ran a survey, like an experimental survey to show people how powerful this is. Like you can poll anything, infrastructure, build back better components all day long, family leave. It's going to poll fine but it's going to be misleading, and it's going to poll majority support. I mean, majority Americans want minimum wage up. So they want everything. Okay. Right. Even if they like limited government, they want it all. Right. Right? Which is why we measure ideology in these 2 different scales. But, even with that, like even as they're telling you, I want all of these things. Let's say I ran the same poll and said Republicans in Congress want to pass paid family leave. I would see much broader support. If I said Democrats in Congress want to pass paid family leave, a lot of that plus 50% support you see would whittle immediately away.
Oh, interesting.
Because like once you put a partisan label on policy, that support changes a lot, right? So like when I talk about how it's not that we need to get rid of survey research, Democrats waste way too much money on it, R&D, and not enough on tactical deployment shit. But like what we're doing with polling, like we could be doing much smarter if we were looking at how this partisan lens filters everything. And the only thing in that exit poll data I will tell you is, yes, it looks like this big conversion swing. And there is conversion swing. Persuasion happened. It didn't happen on policy. It happened on white racial resentment, persuasion, branding, right? But it happened.
Right.
The other story is the partisan composition of the elector. At the end of the day, Republicans were more enthusiastic, and of that 55% turnout rate in a state that's fairly evenly divided, they dominated, right? And when you look at who voted for who in the exit poll data, it's like 95% of Biden voters voted for McAuliffe. 95% of Trump voters voted for Youngkin.
Right.
Okay, so that suggests that, as political scientists will tell you, we got about 10% of an electorate that's conversion like sensitive, and the rest of it is locked in purely based on party allegiance, on tribe.
So of that 10, so they've got 10%. Let's say of the electorate. Where on the scale of the 10% then?
I'm sorry.
Where on the scale?
By the way, I got to tell you, one of the best projects that 538 ever did, in my opinion, was when they mapped like used a pretty large data set to show the ideological diversity of people who claim to be independents.
Right. They're everybody.
So there's moderates. There's some people, to tell you the truth, the liberals who are independent are more ideological than Democrats are, because many Democrats are black, and black Democrats are very moderate, very moderate. That's why South Carolina is always kind of the proving ground, right? When they get to the Democratic primary.
I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, not all independent. I mean, and so like when you get the conversion swing in independence, like once we get all the data in, I will look at the voter file with some other people. And what I'm looking for is, okay, was there left-leaning independent erosion and right-leaning independent surge? How much of that occurred? And the rest of it is conversion.
Okay. That's getting very technical for me, but at least like if on the 10% you'd say are in this, based on yesterday's election, where are those convertible 10%? Where are they sitting on the scale?
Oh, they're all they're the convertible ones, the ideological ones are very ideological, right? So they'd be extreme left or extreme right or center left. Here's the secret about pure independence is that what makes them pure independent is that they have a sense of civic duty about voting, but they don't like politics. They don't pay attention much to politics. I mean, there's going to be some exceptions to that. Someone who's really well-read and engaged, but predominantly, and you can see this in focus group research, especially Rich Thau's excellent stuff from 2020, they don't know jack shit about politics, and they're completely imagistic. So like in my research, I argue the pure independent vote can predictably be guessed or estimated to break against the party in power in these competitive elections. And I'm guessing, like if I had a big data set and I could break it down, shift them out of that bigger pot of independence, they probably broke for Youngkin, maybe 60-40.
Right. So such a small margin there. Sherry, what's your response to that? Or any thoughts on that?
Well, look, when I first started working on the Hill in the mid 80s, it was pretty accepted that the most Americans are in the messy middle. Like 80% were slightly right of center, slightly left of center, but centrist. And then came along conservative talk radio and then later Fox News. And that helped pull people to that fringe, and the left would respond in kind. And so I think you have more people who, in terms of the propaganda that they ingest and what works on them, pulls them to those fringes. That said, when you have lower information voters, people who are not that engaged or who are not highly educated, these are the ones that don't pay attention. As Rachel just said, they aren't really watching politics. They don't care. They say they don't like it. They can be the most vulnerable to some of this messaging that we saw regarding CRT. They don't know that someone's just, mind effed them into something that's very racist. They don't consider themselves to be racist. So you've got the sophisticated racists that worked on these people and stoked the fear. And so they voted their fears, not because they are just born and bred racist and they've been racist all their life. They don't think of themselves that way. I mean, my God, they voted for a black lieutenant governor. So they think we're cool on this. So they don't know that someone just messed with their minds. And that's something that with the media now that's becoming so diverse and people are consuming all kinds of media, but there is a certain part of the electorate that, last year when I was doing America Reads the Mueller report, we were kind of going after those voters who maybe were a little bit older. They weren't online. They weren't on Twitter. They watch only Fox News. They don't know that they only were told by Bill Barr that, Mueller exonerated Trump. And so they believed it, not because, by God, we're going to support him no matter what. They just hadn't received the other information, the accurate information. And so we were reaching them with local TV because they do watch local TV. They were older, they're not on Twitter. They might be on Facebook. I mean, we went through this. These were and they're white. And so we were bracketing, early morning farm reports and news and football and Wendy Williams and, the daytime talk shows to reach those women in that demographic that we were just discussing a minute ago. And that's when you play in the margins, and you can't beat them over the head with the negative advertising either. That works on the base. That gets people to open their wallets and say, yeah, we got to fight. We got to fight. Well, that doesn't work on this group of people. And so in terms of people being in the center, I think most people consider themselves, or probably in most ways are sort of centrist,
Right.
but they
Are
are
they left of
vulnerable
center
to
or
being
right of
pulled
center?
to the extremes.
I think last night taught us they were a little bit more right than we realized. That's in my opinion, is that generally speaking, America might be a little more right than we realize.
Possibly, but I think because of Trumpism, if he was actually held accountable and people would really be reviewing all the crimes, most people can't even keep track of everything that he should be investigated for in the crimes.
Right.
Most people forget that the crimes that Bannon committed and that he was pardoned by Trump. Most of the Bannon fans don't even really know that. So I think if you start focusing on the crimes, and the personalities involved, once these people see these personalities and change on those personalities, they start feeling differently, and then they might be more willing to listen to Democrats on some things. They might be looking at Nancy Pelosi, who today is saying she's putting family leave back into the play here, and that might work on some of these high school educated white women voters. So you might have to, slice and dice like that and build these coalitions. I don't think it's because, again, those voters didn't yesterday say, I am a right-wing Republican and this is how I'm going to vote, as Rachel just explained. You start messing with their minds and pulling them.
So let me give you $100 million, Rachel, and say you've got this money. What would you do to spend it into next?
Wait, where's mine?
You'll get yours in a bit. I want to see how Rachel spends it first, and then we'll come back to yours.
Yeah, no,
or you can spend it together if you want. But there's $100 million.
That's borderline, actually, like what I need to do what I want to do. Right.
Okay. Here we are fundraising.
The autopsy that needs to happen on the left doesn't involve polling voters anymore, right? I mean, what we need to do is we need to open up the books and look and see what are these people doing in terms of their electioneering system from top to bottom. How are these resources getting allocated? What kind of campaigns are they running? What kind of ad buys are they doing? How much is going here, there, and everywhere? What type of messaging are they using? Why are they running these direct mail, honestly, like dialed in recycled messaging from 1980? How much is going to survey research? Why is so much going to survey research? Why is the party so convinced that they need polls to measure competition when the polls constantly let them down? When I could have told them without any I told them exactly which of these House delegates races, and this is all on record. I mean, it's not in the public record because these were private conversations, but these people know who they are, and they all know I pointed exactly to the right districts and told them exactly how they would all get lost and exactly why they would all lose them. So, why are we wasting all this money? And then I would take that $100 million and I would build a system like SpaceX. I mean, NASA and SpaceX both go to space, but as we all know, SpaceX is going there in a far more efficient, less bureaucratic manner. And the fact of is, it's not Jamie Harrison's fault that Virginia got lost. He runs a bureaucracy. You can keep chugging talent into the DNC. I don't give a shit if it's Stacey Abrams or Jesus himself, okay? At the end of the day, the DNC's problem is bureaucracy and this consulting class that has this financial incentive not to change. And it ultimately, until we rip it apart and figure out how do we design a system that is conducive to hyperpolarization and to the modern electorate, understands which voters are moving in which way and how to tap into that, and is geared towards branding and not this dichotomy between mobilization and persuasion. And should we talk about defund the police? Well, no, dude, you shouldn't. But you should also probably let the country know that the other party just tried to have a coup and is intent on dismantling democracy, right?
Good to know.
So that's what I would do. And then what I would do is I would build a wall in the critical places. So, Florida's a winnable race if we go after the Cuban vote. We cannot win statewide in Florida, period. I don't care if it's Val Demings, again, or Jesus himself, unless we figure out how to get Miami, the city of Miami, up into the 80s on Democratic vote share, because right now it's popping in the 60s, and you're never going to win unless you can figure that out. That's a generational divide opening. You have to have hot candidates and those CDs down there running and picking off young Cuban voters. And if you don't have a campaign that's focused extensively building Latino infrastructure that is incorporated from day one and running year round, like the GOP is doing right now and has been doing for 3 years while we're sitting here sleeping, then we're screwed. So that's what I'd be using my $100 million to do.
You know, Richard Ojeda, I don't know if you know the guy. He's from West Virginia, but his point is, why are we spending $250 million fighting, Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, where he's backing all these they're good candidates in swingy districts around the country that he thinks are winnable, but he's getting no support from the DNC itself. He's running his own pack and he's got his own world out there, and it seems to me like that's a pretty good argument, especially if you've got another 40 seats that are now going to be on the bubble, in addition to the ones that already have been on the bubble. Why aren't we diving into those districts and making those districts more winnable? We seem to be giving those up.
Yeah, I mean, we need infrastructure investment, but at the end of the day, as long as we're sending our candidates out, either to do the embarrassed Democrat, I'm a fiscal conservative 2-step shuffle, or, and not attack. I mean, honestly, the other party is going to run a disqualification campaign against any one of our candidates. And it doesn't matter how moderate or woke they are personally, right? It could be J.B. Harrison in South Carolina, who definitely did not run on defunding the police and installing socialism, but was branded that way anyway, right? So ultimately we need people on the ticket who understand you have to lean into being a liberal. You have to lean into being a Democrat. You have to build that brand and redefine it in a positive frame. And while you're doing that, you have to disqualify the Republican Party, who, Sherry, cover your ears, has made it very easy for us to do your economic agenda that we could call, a GOP contract on America, not for America, that has decimated the American middle class, decimated our infrastructure, left us, a world leader in K through 12 as the world's laughing stock, right? It should be it should be easy to go out there and indict this party. And then that's not even getting to the part where it's basically the party of I'm with stupid, right? I mean, who wants to be on a party of crazy, stupid wingnuts?
Right now, I'm pretty familiar with the state of West Virginia. I went to college there. I own a little property there for a little over a decade. And I, in part, grew up just a few miles from the state line. West Virginia is different. And there's a reason why Manchin gets away with a lot of this. I would go in and just blanket West Virginia with radio, not slamming Manchin, but selling the key points of the Democratic agenda. And then maybe follow up noting that Manchin wasn't doing it. Now, West Virginia is a poor state. It's not that sophisticated. You're not going to find as many people online as you would in other places. Radio works. In some places in West Virginia, you can't even get internet. You can't even get cell phone. The mountains plus other installations.
Richard Ojeda says that the kids from school, they go to McDonald's to get the Wi-Fi so they can do their homework. That's how, but that tells you exactly how poor they are and how valuable broadband would be to them. But they don't even, they're not even thinking about that. But that's just an aside.
But I would go there and so that people are aware of what Manchin is doing, because they're really not. I mean, that's talk about a state that votes against their interests. And the Manchin is gold there. There was a James Manchin before that. I mean, it's just you just vote for Manchin no matter.
Now, he's
what.
a Democrat, by the way. You know that. So
he's a Democrat, but he's a bad one.
I know.
He's a bad one.
But he's technically not calling
to get away with it. Yeah, no, he's not. I mean, he's our biggest problem right now.
Manchin's my favorite kind of Democrat. He's the one that holds a seat.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Exactly.
But I would get rid of this consultant culture. Where they take care of their friends. It's not done on merit. They pocket a lot of money, and it's largely male, and they take care of their buddies. And so when you have when you have an all-white male group sitting at a table making these decisions, we shouldn't be surprised when they get it wrong. And you go into a state like Virginia, and guess what? White women, certain groups of white women go the opposite way. And as a woman who spent many years as a Republican operative amongst the white male Republican operatives, I know a little bit about this. And it was a challenge for Republicans. There were certain points of time Republicans could have done a little bit better than they did. But when, so you have to, I hate the word diversity, But it's just common sense. So if it's a group where they only throw in women here and there because they feel like they have to, if it's not really who you are, you're going to get it wrong. And that's the same with any group of people. When you've got this like-minded people sitting around the table thinking they've got this and thinking they only have to say something once so that they don't have to drill down and reach people and take this. So I would take that $100 million and try and for the groups that Rachel was just talking about in Florida, the young Cubans, you find out where they get their information or where they potentially can get their information and go there. And I don't think that's happening enough. Just like, you see people showing ads on Twitter that aren't really being gone anywhere else. And I asked that question a lot of Lincoln Project. I saw early on, I had never seen news reports covering any kind of expenditure for a super PAC without saying where it's running and what's the buy. And so I saw early on that we had a problem here. And I had a feeling I was right about what was going on. And so, it's the consultant culture and people getting very rich and pocketing a lot of money that people are donating, thinking they're donating, say, in this case, to elect Democrats, to help Democrats, to build a Democratic House cushion of, to gain seats in a year when they were supposed to gain seats, to build a cushion against the expected midterm losses. And instead they I think it was lost a net 10. And so when you're not saying how much the buy is, when you're showing the ads and no one is following up saying, where is it running? How are you reaching persuadable voters? And also when you, at least in a campaign, I know Rachel said she doesn't like doing the surveys or whatever, but they're useful to know kind of with messaging if something is going to work before you spend all that money on an ad. Are you just making yourself feel good? Is the base going to feel good because you're fighting back and you're tough and so the big swig and dick club, they all love that. Excuse my French, but that's what happens. Does that work on persuadable voters? No. Persuadable voters, sometimes you need a little bit of I don't want to say a softer touch, but you don't want to alienate them either. Now, those might not be the ads that win the Polly Awards.
But who cares? At least they win some votes.
That's, yeah. And
Rachel,
you have to have grownups at the table who understand that and understand that there's different steps to this before people just go, firing out of the box.
You've both described a lot of money and people, sorry. You finished up there. But you both described that there's a consultant class, all these rich people who are doing things in these parties. How do you actually get rid of them? How do you, this is a question from our chat. How do we get rid of them?
Kickback culture.
Yeah. But I mean, they're there. You've both mentioned them as an obstacle. We don't have much time. How do we move them?
Well, most people are afraid to call them out. I mean, you would be surprised the private messages I get for being so openly calling them out. But I've been dealing with this for a year. I mean, I remember as a Republican, Kellyanne Conway, railing at certain meetings about the meaning the white male consultant kickback culture. And I don't know if it was because she wasn't part of it or that maybe she was running into it and was interfering with what she was trying to achieve because she was doing a lot of polling on, women's issues and whatnot. I think it's a big problem. And the only way you stop it is when the candidates who ultimately are the ones that decide to do the hiring or the party leaders, Chuck Schumer gave the Lincoln Project money, giving it to, instead of Democrats doing it. So I do know a lot of Democratic consultants that were frustrated that the money was being hoovered up by this group that was getting so much press. And so I how do you find the talent out there? Look at track.
It's more about how do you get rid of them? How do you get rid of the other people that are there? Rachel, do you have any thoughts on that?
So here's the thing. We're really talking about two different worlds within these two parties. That's part of the problem for Democrats. I mean, not in this vein, but the fact is the electioneering world for Republican and Democratic parties is as different as their coalitions, their ideologies, their behaviors, their demographic makeups. So what Sherry is describing to some extent about the grifting culture is less a factor. Let me promise you there's many starving people on the left. Okay. Right. But where the left is really their big problem is the status quo, right? There's this model that worked for Bill Clinton in 1992 because the electorate was in a process. The electorate's always in process. So when we talk about realignment and de-alignment and party sorting and all these coalitional changes, we should know nothing's static. I've been studying world history a lot as democracy is declining in the US and things are always moving. Okay. Right. But in the 1990s, when we came out of Reaganomics, the Democratic Party was coming out of a period that's very much like the Republican Party right now, plagued by craziness through the 60s and 70s as social change erupted. You also had the Vietnam War, you had the SLA, the Weather Underground blowing shit up. I mean, it was crazy, right? And they ended up in the national woods for a while. Inflation, Reaganomics gets invented. Hey, we lower taxes, we'll fix inflation, and it worked, but it also caused all these other problems, right? So like when we think about how things have changed, the Republican Party, Karl Rove especially, saw the potential for basically wedge issue politics. He took a concept invented in like one of the early presidential elections, 88, I think, and said, look, let's make referendum politics, right? But let's make referendums not about people the way it was originally invented, and instead make it about issues. And they took gay marriage, and that worked, and the media system was evolving at the same time on the right. And these things combined for them to kind of innovate this thing that both fed and articulates well hyperpolarization and partisanship. The Democratic Party does not have an electioneering system designed for that electorate. It has a system for a lot of persuadable voters. When Sherry was at the peak of her time at the RNC, there was a bigger pool, as she noted, of those independents before those media effects, radicalized them. And so we, like, the thing I'm fighting in the consultant class, I think, is this bias towards the status quo and this fear of trying something new. I would just say, though, it is clear that the modus operandus is not working.
It's interesting. The FEC yesterday announced that foreign governments, foreign money will be able to be funding referendums going forward, which is astounding and ridiculous, but also terrifying, because didn't we just go through this in 2016? FEC is still apparently majority controlled by Republicans on that board. So, I mean, these kind of things are going to be more and more present. I mean, certainly you can see them running issue type campaigns or referendum campaigns based on LGBTQ and on other of these wedge issues that you describe. Is there enough money in the United States to even combat a global force of influencers pouring billions of dollars into America?
I know.
It's a tough one. I would expect you to answer, but it was worth proposing.
That's frightening, actually, because all you need to do is find people who only care about money and don't really have an ideology, and they don't care about the country. I mean, we see this all the time, but now you're talking about massive amounts of money, amounts that most consultants can barely get their heads around, and some can't wait to get their hands on
all the money in the world, really.
And that's what will happen. I mean, we saw a little bit of that with Paul Manafort. You see what happens when someone really doesn't give a shit about their country and what they're willing to do. And now he's out running around free. So I just want to add this one thing. I think people think this sounds like hyperbole, and I think in the era of Trump, which we're still in, let's face it, and could be again, they think everything sounds so crazy and so out there, and that it's tinfoil hat stuff until it happens. You've got Matt Gaetz and others out there talking about, okay, when Republicans win the House next year, we're going to make Donald Trump the Speaker of the House, because you don't have to be an elected member of Congress to be elected Speaker. You just need to get. Now, people say, oh, and then they'll impeach, Biden and Harris, and people, but they won't have the votes in the Senate. That's not the danger. The real danger is Trump will be second in line to the presidency. And you saw the violence at the insurrection. I think that this could happen. And I think that Biden and Harris's lives become in danger then, because that would be how Trump gets back into the White House. I'm saying it out loud. I'm kind of afraid to say this stuff on Twitter because I want them to ban me. But this is basically, you don't think that Steve Bannon wouldn't be, and Flynn out there pumping this up? I mean, they built gallows on the Capitol grounds. They were going to kill Mike Pence that day. They were going to hang him. They were going to try to kill Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Grassley. The secession. The entire line of secession. Pompeo would be next in line. He was conveniently, out of the country. There was a big plan in place there. And if anybody thinks that this just sounds like pie in the sky tinfoil hat crap, well, I got news for you. Just look at what they've done so far. And if that puts Trump in a position where he probably would have to be put back on Twitter, or he'd have the microphone again anyway. He would do it. People say, well, he would hate to do the job of speaker. Well, he's not going to do the job of speaker. He'll farm that out like
That's
he didn't
right.
like being president. He didn't do the job. So I think there's a real danger that that in fact could happen. And you say,
And
well,
Sherry,
you're going to have these sane Republicans that'll get in his way. No, they won't. They'll do it. They'll do what they're told.
And Sherry, I plan on closing October with those ads, like the ads that show people him getting sworn in with that gavel and what it would mean to them.
And put those gallows out. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Hell yeah,
good.
dude.
That's exactly what people need. They need to be able to visualize.
Waking up in Virginia
Look,
right now, like terrified, right? What if we had painted a reality of a Republican governor in these crazy times for those Virginia voters before they had to wake up in that reality? Maybe they would have behaved differently.
I like what you're saying.
Well,
this is exactly what needs to happen for next year.
Yeah, the ad that Rachel's talking about, by the way, that would instill fear, but fear on something that really could happen. The fear that was instilled in Virginia voters, in the lesser educated white women voters of Virginia yesterday, was based on something false. It wasn't real. Showing what Trump could do and what his allies in the House would do. Who would stand up to him? Has there ever been anybody who would stand up and say, no, we're not going to vote for him for speaker? There isn't anybody who will do that.
Right.
Look at all the times over the past 5-6 years, even during the primary, where we thought somebody would stand up to this monster, and they didn't, because he was ratings gold.
Kevin McCarthy,
and they wanted.
Are you listening to Sherry? Because you're never going to be speaker, buddy. It's not happening.
He doesn't care.
He'll roll over and
he just
take
wants the
it.
money.
I mean, this is a real fear, and
it
needs to be. And if that's what it takes to coalesce and find, I remember before I talked about having a few things that are easy to understand to define Trump and Trumpism, and therefore all Republicans buy, because there's so much out there. There's so much out there. You have to zero in on some of it. That would be it. I can't wait. I can't wait for Rachel's ad.
You know what? I think this is so important.
Jerry, I can't wait till I have a big ass budget, because I'm going to send you on a rural America tour of
there you go.
What has 30 years of Republican voting done for you? Nothing.
Wait, to be fair, I worked for Bob Michael, who was very much a moderate, because I'm from Peoria. And, my dad always said, we're Bob Michael, Howard Baker Republicans. My dad is now glued to Fox News it's all changed. So if you go back to those types of Republicans and remind them that that's who they were, and they can work with Democrats, and that the party is no longer that. You have to remind them who they are, because they sound more like conservative Democrats at this point, people who could vote for Joe Biden, which is probably why Joe Biden got the Democratic nomination.
Got to disqualify them. Always disqualify.
It's not the party that when I started working on Capitol Hill in 1984, the beginning of 1984, there were these kind of right-wing religious fringy people that were kind of weird, but they were and I thought, why are they around? They were kind of part of a coalition. This is something that slowly built. This was not the party then. It just, not the ones in Congress. I think there were pockets of people around Reagan that certainly helped him get elected, but working in Congress at the time, you just didn't see this.
But Youngkin is a nicer, friendlier version of Trump. For all intents and purposes, we don't know his policies yet, but I suspect they'll be more palatable in some ways. But overall, the GOP represents a retreat of democracy. We're falling into this fascism. I talk about my growing up in South Africa here a lot on the show, because I don't think people realize how awful it is growing up in fascism, how absolutely it permeates every aspect of your life. And you do not have freedom in everything, which means you have fear about everything, absolutely everything you do, no matter what it is, what your thoughts are, who you're with, what they're doing, what they're saying, who your friends are, what your neighbors are saying. It's absolutely terrifying, not to mention you're the pariah of the world. I mean, this is the kind of future that Americans are voting themselves into.
Well, some of us have already experienced that. You remember, I was hacked. I was catfished. I was hacked. And this is after I first, told the truth about Trump by merely publicly confirming an already published report that he had a super PAC. When he and Lewandowski, this was 6 years ago, in October. And they lied. That the Washington Post did a report. They lied. They were going to sue the Post. And I came forward and said, Lewandowski told me all about it. And met with these guys, and to the point where I was like, why are they talking so openly about the super PAC? I was like, did the laws change? It was so weird. And so just by coming forward and confirming that the Washington Post report was correct. I was not the source for it, by the way, and I know who was now. That's when Trump ordered Ailes to ban me, and then later Jeff Zucker to ban me. This was power he had in a primary. So, that's, pretty chilling stuff. And then, like I said, then I was catfished. Somebody pretending that they were looking to hire me to because some big Republican donors wanted to, make sure Trump didn't get the nomination. And that was just, they're doing that to get information to use against me, I guess, in the lawsuit. Should I prevail? And then I was hacked. And my email was hacked. And
this is what democracy is going to look like.
This is what I experienced at a time when it just sounded crazy for me to talk about it because it was so early. Oh, that dog is adorable.
What's his name again?
And so it sounded so crazy. And now everybody realizes, oh, yeah, this is what Trump does. So, I do know what it feels like, and I was alone in it. So at least this way.
I know. You went through absolute hell there. Rachel, what's your dog's name again? I forget.
This is Hamilton.
Hamilton, of course. Hi, Hamilton. What does Hamilton think? Does he have any thoughts about how to win back everything? Oh
gosh, yes. Hammy said, "Send mommy $170 million."
I only had 100 million, but I'll give you 175 because you've been so great tonight. Rachel, tell everyone how they can find you on wherever you want them to find you, and how they can find your PAC, and maybe they'll send you some money.
Sure. So my Twitter handle is @RachelBitticofer. It's the only Rachel Bitticofer because no one would want that name. And then please follow me also at Strike PAC. That's STRIKEPAC. Please follow that. Check through our ads that were in our launch packet. Basically, we're at startup mode here. Did some nice field testing in Virginia, but I wanted to build a blue wall. Couldn't build it. Help us build it for 22.
We sure need one. So everyone check out Rachel's Twitter feed and her PAC. And Sherry, we're so excited you're back. I'm so thrilled you're here and on Narrative.
Yeah, I've taken a long break. I stopped doing my podcast and stopped doing a number of things. Something just ran by her. Another dog, I think.
He's still Twitter.
My Twitter handle is at Sherry Jacobus, CHERI JACOBUS. I do have a website. I haven't updated it for a while, but it's sherryjacobus.com. So, and
awesome.
I'll hopefully have other things coming up soon that I can announce as soon as we get past it. Still dealing with the health challenges, but so far the doctors are like, yeah, we can't find cancer. So hopefully we keep it that way.
That is good news. I can't wait to have you guys back on the show. You're both terrific together, and hopefully we'll do it again because it's a really interesting insight, and you've certainly sparked some interesting ideas for me, and I'm sure the audience will have you back hopefully in the near future on Narrative. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you guys.
Yeah, likewise. Have a good night. And thank you at home for watching. We'll see you again on Friday. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.